The morning they came for my fence, I realized something terrifying in my neighborhood. Control wasn't enforced by cops. It was enforced by Beige. It started just after sunrise. I opened my front door, still half asleep, clutching my coffee mug, when I saw 3 men in identical HOA polo shirts marching across my lawn like a well-trained squadron. Each carried a paint roller, a bucket of dull, lifeless beige paint, and an air of authority that didn't belong on my property. And right behind them stood Karen. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Shadow Lake HOA, with her oversized sunglasses, her clipboard of doom, and that permanent smirk that said, "I own you, Frank." I hadn't even finished my first sip of coffee before she declared my fence an eyesore to community harmony. Apparently, my deep cedar stain, the one I spent all last summer perfecting, violated the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic code. The men didn't even hesitate. They laid down their tarps, opened the paint buckets, and began erasing my hard work one brushstroke at a time. "You can't just paint someone's private property," I shouted, stepping onto the porch in my slippers. Karen adjusted her sunglasses and waved her clipboard like a badge of power. "The HOA has full jurisdiction. Frank, you signed the agreement. The rules apply to everyone." Her tone could have cut glass, sharp, smug, dripping with authority. What she didn't know, or maybe didn't want to know, was that my property wasn't actually under the HOA's control. My lot had been grandfathered out years ago, long before her crusade for beige conformity began. A small technicality, one she conveniently ignored. As the rollers turned my beautiful fence into a flat desert of beige, I felt something shift inside me. Anger, yes, but under it, a spark, an idea, something bold, brilliant, and a little insane. I could have called the cops. I could have yelled or filed complaints. But instead, I smiled, because I realized something. Karen's greatest weapon was the rulebook. Mine was the loophole she'd never see coming. Karen had been after me since the day I moved in 3 years ago. My rustic mailbox was visually inconsistent. My garden gnome disturbed the community's tone. My solar lights were excessively modern for the street's aesthetic. Every week, it was something new, and always signed sincerely. The HOA, even though everyone knew she was behind it. She wasn't even an elected member, just a manipulative puppet master who controlled the timid HOA president, Greg, with passive-aggressive charm. 2 weeks before the paint attack, I caught her pacing near my property line with a tape measure. "What are you doing, Karen?" She smiled thinly. "Just ensuring harmony. Frank, we all need to stay within limits." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have, because that harmony turned out to be the calm before a beige storm. When they left that morning, the fence dried into the color of cardboard. It stood there like a monument to conformity, dull, obedient, lifeless. Karen looked satisfied, like she'd just claimed new territory for her beige empire. I stared at the fence for hours that afternoon. Every plank felt like a symbol of her control. That's when I decided I wouldn't just fight back. I'd obliterate Beige. That night. I sat at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee and the HOA bylaws open on my laptop. If Karen's power came from the rules, then I'd find my freedom inside them. Hours passed as I scrolled through pages of legal mumbo-jumbo, property maintenance, aesthetic cohesion, fence color approval, until finally, I found it. A single line buried deep in the document. Homeowners may repaint fences in a color consistent with their artistic or thematic preference, provided the fence lies within property boundaries. I stared at the phrase artistic preference like it was the Holy Grail. Then I started laughing, loudly enough that my cat bolted from the room. Artistic preference, that was my loophole. That was my weapon. The next few days, I played the role of the broken man perfectly. I waved at Karen, complimented her hydrangeas, which looked half dead from overwatering, and nodded politely when she gloated. She thought she'd won. She had no idea the revolution brewing behind my garage door. I drove 40 miles to a hardware store out of town, didn't want any curious locals reporting back to the Beige Queen. When the clerk asked what I was painting, I smiled. "A statement," I said. "Something bright. Like, if a rainbow and a nuclear explosion had a baby." He blinked. "Good luck with that." I bought gallons of paint, neon orange, electric blue, radioactive green, and hot pink. When I tested a patch behind the shed that night, it glowed like a rave on fire. Perfect. For 3 nights, I worked under the cover of darkness. Each stroke of neon was an act of rebellion against conformity, against control, against beige tyranny. When I finished, my fence looked like freedom itself. Chaotic, brilliant, alive. I went to bed grinning. The next morning, the sunlight hit my fence, and the entire street lit up like a carnival. The neon shimmered under the sky, and within seconds, Karen appeared. Her jaw dropped. Her coffee cup froze midair. Even her dog stopped walking. "What is this?" she screamed. I smiled, pretending to water my plants. "Clause 14, subsection 3, artistic preference," I said calmly. "You said you wanted harmony. I'm just expressing mine." Her face went redder than my orange panel. Neighbors started coming out, laughing, whispering. Kids circled on bikes shouting, "Cool fence, Mr. Frank." Karen was losing her mind. She screamed about property values, neighborhood tone, and visual pollution. But for every angry word, someone else said, hey, technically, it's on his property, or actually, it's kinda cheerful. By noon, HOA President Greg arrived, looking like he wanted to disappear into the asphalt. He read the bylaw out loud. Homeowners are free to repaint within property boundaries, according to artistic or thematic preference. Karen's jaw dropped again. You're not calling that art. Art is subjective, Karen, I said. Besides, it glows with freedom. The crowd laughed. Her empire of beige was cracking, and this was only the beginning. Asterisk. When my fence went viral, Karen didn't see art. She saw an uprising. And in her world, nothing terrified her more than people thinking for themselves. The morning after my neon masterpiece debuted, Shadow Lake looked less like a neighborhood and more like the aftermath of a color bomb. Kids were taking selfies in front of my fence. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly bringing muffins and coffee just to see the art in person. Karen, though, she was a volcano in designer sunglasses. She spent the entire day pacing the sidewalk, pointing at my fence like it was a moral crime scene. Every neighbor she cornered got the same speech. He's mocking our community values. It's vandalism, not art. But the more she ranted, the more people laughed. And that laughter, that loss of control, broke something inside her. That night, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Asterisk. When I walked into the HOA clubhouse that evening, I swear I could feel the tension vibrating off the walls. Karen sat up front like a prosecutor at trial, her stack of papers taller than her latte. President Greg looked pale, clutching his clipboard like it was a life raft. We're here to address the matter of the paint situation on Lot 29. Greg said nervously. Karen shot to her feet before he could finish. It's not a situation, Greg. It's an act of defiance. That man, she pointed at me like I was on trial for treason, has turned this peaceful neighborhood into a circus. I leaned back calm. Actually, Karen, I prefer the term gallery. The crowd laughed. Greg tried not to. Karen slammed a photo onto the projector screen, a close-up of my fence glowing in the sunlight. This alone, she declared, drops property values by 5%. Someone from the back yelled, I'd pay more to live next to that. Laughter filled the room again. Karen's jaw tightened. She tried everything. Property value panic, neighborhood standards, even safety hazards. It's a distraction. Drivers could lose focus and crash. Greg blinked. Karen, this is a cul-de-sac then. Golf carts. Greg, think of the golf carts. It was like watching someone publicly lose a chess game they started themselves. When my turn came, I stood slowly and said, First, I didn't break a single rule. You issued the repaint order without confirming my HOA status. My property I pulled out my deed was annexed before the HOA charter. You repainted my fence without legal authority. The room gasped. Greg nearly dropped his clipboard. Wait, you're not part of the HOA? Karen froze. That's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, I said. You all paid to repaint a fence you didn't own. The room erupted, laughter, whispers, disbelief. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. He's manipulating the system. She snapped. No, I replied calmly. I'm just reading the same rulebook you weaponized against everyone else. That was the moment the beige empire cracked wide open. Karen stormed out, vowing, This isn't over. Frank, you'll regret this. I smiled. Only if the paint fades. Karen, only if it fades. The next morning, I received a letter, a county citation, demanding I repaint the fence within 72 hours. Typical Karen. She had skipped the HOA and gone straight to the government, but instead of panicking, I went straight to the county clerk's office. Donna the clerk was one of those no-nonsense women who'd seen every petty feud imaginable. After reading my documents, she leaned back and said, Honey, your property isn't under HOA authority. There's no county ordinance on fence color. You could paint it plaid if you wanted. I grinned. Plaid, huh? Maybe next year. When I got home, Karen was standing outside with 2 uniformed code officers beside her. She looked triumphant. You're in violation of county standards, she said smugly. The taller officer cleared his throat. Actually, ma'am, he's not. This property's outside HOA jurisdiction. There's no legal restriction on fence color. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. Unless it's offensive or blocks traffic, it's perfectly legal, the officer replied with a smirk. They left. Karen didn't move. Her confidence, her entire identity, was unraveling in front of the neighborhood she once ruled. And that's when I decided to finish this once and for all. I hosted a little celebration on my lawn the next weekend. Free coffee, cookies, and paint sample cards labeled Freedom Blue, Karen Repellent, Orange Rebellion. Pink neighbors loved it. They started talking about painting their own sheds and mailboxes and new colors. When Karen told old Mr. Halvorsen his yellow shed clashed with community tone, he just grinned. My tone is retired, Karen, not Beige. By Monday, half the cul-de-sac was joking about artistic preference projects. Karen's authority was officially dead, but she wasn't done. She filed a civil nuisance complaint claiming my fence caused her emotional distress and reputational harm due to unrestrained chromatic aggression. When I showed my lawyer, my college friend, Clark, he nearly spit out his coffee. She actually wrote chromatic aggression. He laughed. Frank, we're not just fighting this. We're going to make history. The day of the hearing looked like a festival. Neighbors, reporters, even a local art blogger showed up. Karen arrived in a navy blazer, carrying binders like she was storming Congress. I came with Clark and my artist friend, Lena, the one who had turned my fence into a full-blown mural masterpiece. The judge called the case Karen versus Frank Fence Dispute. You could practically hear the audience stifle laughter. Karen's lawyer started with his speech about visual pollution and psychological discomfort caused by excessive vibrancy. It sounded like a stand-up routine, performed in legalese. Then, it was Clark's turn. He calmly presented evidence showing how Karen illegally ordered the HOA to repaint my property, then tried to punish me for undoing her mistake. He ended by saying, "Your Honor, we're not countering for damages. We're asking for a simple recognition that my client's fence qualifies as protected artistic expression." He played a short clip from a local news piece that had dubbed my mural the Mona Lisa of suburban rebellion. Even the judge smiled. Karen couldn't take it. She jumped up, red-faced. "This isn't art. It's chaos. It's humiliating." The judge leaned forward. "Ma'am, art is often chaotic, and public opinion seems to disagree." Then, with a faint grin, the judge said, "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. The fence shall be recognized as protected artistic expression." Gavel, laughter, applause. Game over. Karen stormed out, shaking with fury. The next week, the HOA board held an emergency meeting, not to punish me, but to remove Karen from her advisory position. Greg told me afterward the vote was unanimous. Her reputation shattered, her control gone. A week later, I saw a moving truck outside her house. No goodbyes, no last words, just silence. The day after she left, Lena came by with one last surprise. On the far left panel of my neon fence, she painted a small golden plaque that read, "Freedom is contagious." When she finished, I stood there for a long time, watching the colors glow under the afternoon sun. The fence had started as revenge, but it had become something bigger. Neighbors were smiling again, painting again, living again. Even the HOA changed from fear to cooperation. Karen's war for conformity had accidentally birthed a community that valued creativity. Sometimes I still picture her, sitting somewhere, staring at another beige wall, wondering how everything slipped through her perfectly manicured fingers, because the truth is simple. She didn't lose to me, she lost to color. The fence still stands bright, proud, undefeated, a monument to rebellion. A reminder that sometimes, the loudest revolution doesn't start with a fight, it starts with a paintbrush. So tell me, what's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever heard? Did you ever find your own loophole? Drop it in the comments below, and remember, stay colorful, not compliant.